We'll turn, if you would, to Revelation chapter 12. Revelation chapter 12. We're continuing on in this series. Well, we're more than halfway through, on the back end of it. And again, in this chapter, we're going to touch on a few things. There's just certain chapters I've looked at, and there's just no easy way to get through them without being a little lengthy. So again, I ask for your patience in that. In this chapter, we're going to be introduced to a lot of symbolism. We're going to be introduced to a woman. We're going to be introduced to a dragon. We're going to be introduced to a child. We're going to be introduced to an angel. And we're also going to look at a theory that is very popular in evangelical Christianity, that Satan has access to heaven. You've probably even heard that. And we're going to investigate that very briefly, and I'm going to show you, according to, well, maybe not your Bible, but the Bible, how that is not even possible. All right, so let's pray first before we start. Abba, we thank you for the day. Certainly, thank you for this blessed book. We thank you that we can look at it, read it, study it. We have your Spirit that helps us to understand. Lord, we might not have all the answers, and that's all right. But what this book has done has not only given us hope, but also I pray, Lord, that we also see that the future, which is certainly very bright for us and very hopeful for us, will not be for many, many people. And so, Lord, help us as we continue to go through this book, that it propels us to go out and share the good news of salvation through Yeshua the Messiah, the only way, the truth, and the life. We pray all these things in Yeshua's name as always. Amen. Verse 1, Revelation chapter 12. A great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. And she was with child, and she cried out, being in labor and in pain to give birth. So John, very quickly, it's not going to take him a whole lot of time to get to tell you that he's going to be using a lot of symbolism in this chapter. A great sign. Yeah, he's letting you know ahead of time. Now, because this woman gives birth to a child, and I'll tell you ahead of time, we'll get there obviously, but the child is Yeshua, all right? So because the woman is giving birth to the child, you can imagine what the Catholic Church has done with this. All right, what the Catholic Church has done has taken this passage here and has just disregarded the rest, really, of the chapter and disregarded the Scriptures entirely. And so what do you think the Catholic Church has said about who this woman is? You guessed it, Mother Mary, full of grace, right? And in fact, if you go to a Catholic church, and I don't suggest you do, unless, of course, it's for like a wedding or something or other. But if you go to one, you're going to find paintings, you're going to find drawings, stained glass windows, so on and so forth, and you're going to see, the quote-unquote Holy Mother. And if you look at the pictures, what you'll notice is that she has what over her head? Stars. How many stars? 12. 12 stars. And the Catholic Church got it wrong. Okay? Catholic Church got it wrong. Why? Genesis 37, verse 9. Joshua speaking, and Joshua says that, or excuse me, not Joshua, Joseph. He says this, now Joseph is speaking, okay, speaking of Joseph. Now he had still another dream, and related it to his brothers, and said, lo, I had still another dream, and behold, the sun and the moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me. Ta-da. He's talking about Israel. Now, why did he say 11 stars and not 12? Because he's the 12th star, all right? So the woman in John's depiction here, chapter 12, is Israel, not Mother Mary full of grace. Okay, Israel as a woman, throughout the Tanakh, it's nothing that we haven't seen before. You see it in Isaiah chapters 54 and 56. You see Israel depicted as a woman in Jeremiah chapter 3. You have Israel depicted as a woman in Micah chapters 4 and 5. So it's nothing new, and John is once again using this terminology. He says this woman, okay, being in labor and in pain. More than likely, now that we know we're talking about Israel and the birth of the Messiah, it's more than likely referring to the time in history when Messiah was born, under Roman occupation, Roman domination. When Yeshua was born, and we all are on the same page, right? He wasn't born December 25th, right? We got that, right? Right. We've graduated from the December 25 stuff, right? We all know it wasn't even that month. It was in the fall, and it was more than likely at Sukkot. But at any rate, so during the time when Yeshua was born, Israel was under Roman occupation. It wasn't a very good time for Israel. It wasn't a very easy time for Israel. So the woman is going to give birth to who? We'll get to it in a moment. Verse 3. Then another sign appeared in heaven. Here we go. More symbolism. And behold, a great red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his heads were 7 diadems, and his tail swept away a third of the stars of heaven and threw them to earth. More symbolism, right? Another sign. Here, and you got to get used to it, especially in the book of Revelation. If you remember, I told you, Revelation isn't written in chronologically. And so sometimes it can be confusing. What he's doing here is John is giving his reader or his listeners a bit of the past. He's giving them some history. We have the luxury of a completed canon. You have in your possession, whether it's the book itself or on an app, you have God's Word. The 66 books are the divinely inspired Word of the true and living God, inerrant and infallible. There are no books that out there that should belong in here, and there's no books in the Bible that don't belong in there. We have God's Word, divinely inspired. But John's day, they didn't. And so he can't assume that they have all this information. He's going to share some information with them. He uses the symbolism, and he says, a great red dragon. Red, symbolism, symbolizes death, bloodshed. We've seen that back in Revelation 6:4 with the horseman, right? The 4th horseman. All right. So we have red. He's given us a picture of a dragon. Okay. Dragons really came into literature really during, big time Greek mythology, the Greco-Roman era. In fact, John's story that he's telling, he's got a woman, he's got a child, he's got a dragon. His readers, first century Greco-Roman culture, they would pick out this story very clearly because the story is actually, once it's told in Greek mythology. You have a god and you have a goddess, and their names slip me, but they give birth to a sun god named Apollo. And Apollo's a little one, and he grows up, and when he grows up, the sun god Apollo takes on Python, the great dragon, and Apollo defeats Python. So you have this Greek mythology going on. And so this kind of terminology, very, what's the word I'm looking for? Very well-known first century, okay? But he's going on, and now he's going to start describing this thing. 7 heads, 10 horns, 7 diadems. We're going to see more imagery like that when we get next week into chapter 13 and eventually when we get to 17. Don't try and spend too much time trying to figure out what the numbers mean. You're spinning your wheels when you're doing that. Okay? I'm not going to be able to figure it out, and if you want to try, you can go ahead. But what I think John is really starting to point at is he wants to show you how massive, how powerful this enemy is. The dragon, Lucifer. Listen, Lucifer is a defeated foe, and we know he is. Messiah defeated him at Calvary. But he's not to be toyed with. He is a dangerous foe. He's a serious foe. He's the defeated foe, but he's not one to be taken lightly. All right. And as you see, he describes him with diadems. Satan has been wanting humanity to worship him since the garden. He wants to be the king. He wants to be the king. Diadems, okay? So we know that this dragon is referring to Satan. His tail swept away a third of the stars of heaven. In the pagan world, stars were recognized by the pagans as deity, the gods, right? In Jewish literature, stars are referred to as the angels. And that's the terminology that John is employing here. It's nothing new. Isaiah used it as well. Isaiah 14, verse 12. Listen, how you have fallen from heaven, O star of the morning. See? Son of the dawn, you have been cut down to the earth, you who have weakened the nations. So John is employing more symbolism, and he's using the stars. So what's he saying? A third of the stars, a third of the angels went with Lucifer. And if you notice, where did they get thrown? They were cast from heaven, where? And threw them to the earth. Earth is their abode. This atmosphere. This is where they reside. They do not reside in heaven. They have no access to heaven. Heaven is a place of holiness and cleanness and goodness. The demons and Lucifer have no access to heaven. Okay, we're going to get into that a little bit more. Continuing in verse 4, and the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth, so that when she gave birth, he might devour her child. Since the garden, when God told Eve, your seed will crush the head of the serpent, from that moment, Lucifer has been trying to destroy her seed. From that moment, and as time went on, and now God's promise has been narrowed down to what? A particular race. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So now we know it's the Hebrew race. And Lucifer has been trying to destroy that race. And then it got narrowed down a little bit closer to what? Now the tribe of Judah. And then it was narrowed down to even closer to what? The lineage of David. And so when you look throughout the scriptures, Lucifer has always been trying to destroy that seed that was going to get the Messiah. And he's employed a number of individuals and characters throughout history in order to do that. He did it with Pharaoh and used Pharaoh. He used King Saul, who tried to kill David. He used Saul. He's used Nebuchadnezzar. He's used Haman. He used King Herod when Yeshua was born, and I'm just naming a few. So over and over again, he's tried to destroy this seed about to give birth, that he might devour her child. Okay, verse 5. And she gave birth to a son, a male child who is to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. And her child was caught up to God and to his throne. So God keeps his word. He says, your seed is going to crush the head of the serpent. And God kept his promise and preserved that seed all the way to and through the birth of the Messiah. So Messiah did come. Now the Messiah is who? Who is to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. There's a difference. There's a difference between the millennium, Yeshua's reign on earth, and the New Jerusalem. Many people don't recognize that, but there's a difference. During Yeshua's reign on earth, and we're coming back with him to be here in glorified bodies, he's going to rule with a rod of iron. A rod. Spare the rod and spoil the child, right? You only rule with a rod when there's some kind of rebellion. So on this earth, even though the curse will be removed, we're coming back in glorified bodies. I believe when the curse is moved, we're going to see what this world looked like prior to the fall. I think so. I think we're going to see what this world looked like before the flood, because the flood changed it all. I think we're going back to that when Messiah comes back. But follow me now in this. So we're coming back in glorified bodies. Now you might say, well, wait a minute, where's the rebellion coming from? So there's some kind of rebellion. We know that Lucifer is going to be chained up. We'll see this later on as well. For 1,000 years. Then he comes out and he does what? He goes to deceive the nations. So there's some kind of rebellion there. But Yeshua is the King of Kings. Look, this is where I'm coming from. As we see through the tribulation, God is going to protect his remnant. At the end of the tribulation, when Messiah comes back, they will look upon me whom they have pierced. They will mourn for him as they mourn for an only son. Right? He's coming back. Israel will recognize him. And Paul says in Romans 11, all Israel will be saved. They're going to recognize him. They're going to know him. They're going to accept him as the king and the Messiah. We're coming back with him on this earth. But think about it. Those people that made it through the tribulation and saw Yeshua and got saved, they didn't die. They weren't raptured, and they didn't die. So guess what? Isaiah gives us a little snapshot of the millennium and what it's going to look like with them. Listen to Isaiah 65, beginning in verse 19. I will also rejoice in Jerusalem. Messiah is coming back. And be glad in my people, and there will no longer be heard in her the voice of weeping and the sound of crying. No more war. No more Palestinians. No more West Bank. No longer will there be an infant who lives but a few days. So when he comes back, I got news. Planned Parenthood, you're going out of business. Babies aren't going to be dying. Or an old man who does not live out his days. For the youth will die at the age of 100. And the one who does not reach the age of 100 will be thought accursed. So you've got these people, right? Now Yeshua's on the throne, and they keep living. And what do? They're entering into marriage, and they're having children. And those children have children. And those children have children. And they're living 100 years, 200 years, 300 years old, 400 years old. And you're going back to the way it was prior to the flood, when God was using people and multiplying and filling this earth. You've got people living for hundreds of years. But the children who are born, guess what? They got to get saved just like you and me. Salvation by grace through faith. Now, what's interesting, we're going to be there as well, but in glorified bodies. Now, how that works out, that's interesting. It's fascinating. We don't have all the details. All right. But there is going to be some kind of rebellion there when some people, and those children have children, and those children have children, and they're not going to accept Yeshua as the Messiah. We got some kind of problem going on, and that's why he has to rule with a rod of iron. So we don't have all the information, but we do have some snapshots. Her child was caught up to God and to his throne. His death, his burial, his resurrection, his ascension. Continuing, verse 6. Then the woman fled into the wilderness, where she had a place prepared by God, so that there she would be nourished for 1,260 days. Now he's turning his attention to the last half of the tribulation. And again, he's bouncing back and forth, and it can be somewhat frustrating, but that's the Hebraic style of poetry that he's using. Okay? Again, we mentioned last week, anti-Semitism is existent in our world, right? Throughout the Middle East, throughout Europe as well. When we get to the last half of the tribulation, not we, but you think anti-Semitism is bad now. It's going to be worse than it ever has been. Okay? When that happens, and it gets so bad for the Jewish people, the scriptures tell us that God will deliver Israel. Where? Into the wilderness. Into the wilderness. The wilderness is where God deals with his people. Always. When God redeemed Israel from Egypt, where did he take them? Wilderness. The wilderness. That's where he deals with us. That's where he molds us. That's where he shapes us. And I'm telling you, if God is preparing you for the next chapter in your life, whether it's marriage, whether it's ministry, whatever it may be, when he's about to deal with you and build you into something, he's going to take you out into the wilderness. That's what he does. And when you're out in that wilderness, man, it gets kind of lonely sometimes. And it can get kind of cold at night. And the food, you got to rely on him to give you manna every day. Right? And water is not so easy out in the wilderness. You got to rely on him to give you water from the rock. But he'll do it. But he's not going to make things easy. Why? Because he's trying to make you into something that he needs. A vessel of honor. So he takes us out into the wilderness. That's what he's doing here. He's taking his remnant that he's going to save into the wilderness. Well, what does that mean? He's preparing them for something. Where she had a place prepared by God. There are commentators and authors who take that literally, and maybe you've heard it, where they say, well, that's the rock city of Petra. Maybe you've heard that. I don't think that's what he's talking about. I don't think that's what John is talking about. Because when I hear the phrase, I look at the phrase, and it says, had a place prepared by God, a place prepared, and I'm thinking, where have I heard that terminology before? John 14. Where I go to prepare a place for you. And so I see it where, okay, he's not talking literally. He's talking, I'm going to protect you. I'm going to take you, and I'm going to protect you, and I'm going to make you into what I need you to be. A place where I go, I'm going to prepare a place for you. The promises of God are always perfect. Always. They always come to fruition. The timing is perfect. Nothing can thwart his plan and his purpose. Whether it be on earth or whether it be in heaven. A place prepared. Okay? Continuing verse 7. And there was war in heaven. Michael and his angels waging war with the dragon. The dragon and his angels waged war, and they were not strong enough, and there was no longer a place found for them in heaven. And the great dragon was thrown down, the serpent of old, who is called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. He was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. There are commentators, I've read them, and their scholarship is good, and I respect their words. I do. And the commentators I've looked at those three verses, and they're saying that's in the future. That's during the tribulation period. And I'm here to tell you that's not what John is saying. He's giving a piece of information that happened in the past. He's not talking about the future. He's talking about what has already happened. You can't assume that his audience, it's not like everybody in Asia Minor is walking around with a King James Bible. He's got to give them information that they probably don't already know. And so what does he do? He tells them of the fall. He tells them of the fall. The opinion of the commentators, and if you do your own study, you're going to run into this, is that Satan has access to heaven. Satan has access to heaven, the demons have access to heaven, and this passage, finally in that day, there's going to be a war and they're going to be cast out. Now, in order to give more credence to that argument, and I've read them, I've seen their examples. Guess where they draw from? Job chapter 1, Job chapter 2, Zechariah chapter 3. Every time. I've looked at it, Job 1, Job 2, Zechariah 3. And if you look at Job 1 and 2, and if you look at Zechariah 3, in your English Bible, it will tell you that Satan is before God. But wait a minute, we got a problem, don't we? Because Satan fell from heaven. I mean, it was in the garden where God even told him, I'm paraphrasing here, you're going to crawl around in your belly. Earth is going to be your home. So what's he doing back in heaven? Well, like somebody left the key underneath the mat or something for him? So what's he doing there? I thought he was cast out. Folks, this thinking that Satan has access to heaven and he can come and go is based on a mistranslation of your Bible. The Hebrew word that is in Job 1 and Job 2 and Zechariah 3, the Hebrew word is Satan. Satan. And it is a noun. It's a noun. There's nothing intrinsically evil about the word at all. All it means is challenger. One who stands in the way. One who opposes. And you can't say, well, there's something evil about it. No, because Moses used that very same word, Satan, in Numbers 22 to describe the angel of the Lord. We know the story when Balaam was on the donkey, and the angel of the Lord stood in the way. And if you look at the verse, you'll see the word adversary. The angel of the Lord was an adversary. And the Hebrew word that Moses uses is Satan. All it means is someone who stands in the way, one who challenges. I could challenge Rob to a game of checkers or chess. Is there something evil about that? No. Yet, what our English translators have done is they've taken a noun, Satan, and they changed it to a personal name, Satan. Why? It's a noun. In the Hebrew text, you have a prefix that's attached to the main word, ha-satan, which simply means the challenger. So what's happening in Job 1 and 2? Remember, why did God create the angels? To serve him, to be messengers for him, right? But also to do what? To serve and help us, to watch over us, to help us, to minister to us, right? Angels are around us all the time helping us. We don't even see them, but they're helping us, okay? Paul also mentions that angels learn from us. They learn from us by watching us and observing us. We have a relationship with God that they don't have. Yeshua didn't die on the cross for the angels. He died on the cross for the elect, for us. So the angels don't, we have a relationship that they don't have. And they learn from us. They watch us. They observe us. In Job 1 and 2, you have an angel, not a fallen angel, and certainly not Satan, who stands before God. And what does God ask him? And I'm paraphrasing off the top of my head. Where have you been? Where have you been going, right? And what does this angel tell him? To and fro upon the earth. He's relating what he's been doing. He's giving a report. And what does the angel say? He says, in essence, this is what he's saying. Lord, you've set up a system, really, on earth. You give them shelter. You give them food to eat and water to drink. And you bless the fruit of their wombs. And you give them cattle. And you give them vineyards. And you give them wheat. And you give them grain. And you give them. And you love them. And they love you. And they serve you. And they worship you. But Lord, if you took those things away, would they love you the way they do? Would they serve you the way they do? And listen, that is a great question to ask ourselves. Would you be worshiping the Lord today if he took all of that away and all you had left was salvation? Where would we? And this is what the angel is saying. Remember, God doesn't provide the air to breathe for the spirits, or food to eat, or water to drink. They don't procreate. They don't multiply and fill the earth. They don't do any of these things. We do. And what does God tell this challenging angel? Have you considered my servant Job? Because he knows. Job's going to pass the test. Folks, that's what's happening in Job chapters 1 and 2. There's no Satan there. There's nothing evil going on. Nothing. In Zechariah 3, okay, you have what I call a heavenly tribunal. Okay, you've got God who is the judge, obviously. You've got the angel of the Lord. You've got another challenging angel. Is it the same one? Have no idea. Doesn't really matter. And you also have Joshua, who's the high priest. If you don't realize that Joshua is the high priest, you're never going to understand what's going on in Zechariah 3. Very important that you get that. If anybody here, I mean, you've all had jury duty, right? When you go to the Palm Beach County Courthouse, right, you go into the courtroom, you got the judge there, right? You've got prosecuting attorneys, at least one. You've got defense attorneys, at least one, right? You've got the plaintiff, you've got the defendant, what have you. The attorneys are going to present what are called arguments, right? And so they present their arguments. They present whether it's questioning, whether it's statements, what have you. If the prosecuting attorney is presenting his argument, and the defense attorney doesn't like that line of questioning, what will they say? Objection, Your Honor, right? The judge at that point has a decision to make, right? Either sustained which is, hey, there's nothing wrong with this, continue on. Or what does the judge say? Overruled. All right, or wait a minute, sustained isn't, you're right, this is inappropriate. Overruled, counselor, continue. There's nothing wrong. Okay, now that you know that, turn your attention to Zechariah 3. What do we have? You got to know the background. God married Israel at Sinai. Israel is now his wife. He is her husband, right? What did Israel do? Committed harlotry, whored with the other nations, idolatry, wickedness, and everything else, the gods and all. And God, as a loving husband, over and over and over again, sends prophet after prophet after prophet after prophet. Come back home. Come back to your husband. I love you. Repent and return to me. Not only did Israel not do that, they killed the prophets that God sent. So, God sends Assyria. And Assyria wipes out the northern kingdom. Then Assyria turns their attention south to Judah. God relents Assyria to getting into Jerusalem. We're going to stop. Stop right there. So they don't get to Jerusalem. Because God's going to give Judah one more chance. You've seen what I've allowed to happen. Right? Return to me. And Judah says what? Oh, see, we are impenetrable. They can't kill us. They can't do anything. Why? Because we have the temple, we have the ark, and we have the Torah. Nothing can happen to us. Really. So here comes Nebuchadnezzar. And Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians steamroll right into Jerusalem, and they wipe out Jerusalem, destroying the temple. They whisk Israel off to 70 years of captivity. At the end of 70 years, Cyrus issues a decree. You can go back to your land, start rebuilding the wall, start rebuilding the temple. That's where you pick up Zechariah 3. What is happening? Joshua is standing there as a high priest. What do high priests do? They represent the people to God, and they represent God to the people. They're the intermediary. That's the high priest. They're a representative. So what does the challenging angel do here? In essence, look at what Israel has perpetrated. Look at what Israel has done. They have sinned. They played the whore. They've done all this thing. Are they worthy to go back to the land? Are they worthy of this expedition that you've put them on? This mission that you've put them on? And what does God say? The Lord rebuke you. Why? Because he says, in that passage, he says about Israel, she's a brand plucked from the fire. In other words, stop that line of comment. Because I've taken her, I plucked her from the fire. I have a purpose and a plan for her. Look at Israel. Filthy and dirty. I'm going to take those clothes off of Israel. I'm going to wash her down. I'm going to put clean clothes on her. Why? Because I have a purpose for her and a plan for her. Because the Messiah has to be born. Because the Messiah has to die. That's Zechariah 3. No Satan. Satan's nowhere there. Satan does not have access to heaven. Good grief. I mean, really? Here we are. Am I right? Think about Judy. We look forward to going to heaven, right? I mean, no one wants to die, but we all want to go to heaven, right? We all long to be, man, the stress and the strain and the work and the oh, my back hurt. Whatever doesn't hurt doesn't work, okay? And I'm going to lay this body down, this tent down, and man, I get to go to heaven. I can't wait because Lucifer's there waiting for me. I mean, really? Does this make any sense whatsoever? He was cast out of heaven. He's holy, unholy, clean, unclean, heaven, hell, sheep, goats, wheat, tares, saved, lost. There's a separation, always. Satan has no access to heaven. All right? It's not like, hey, Peter's going to bed. He's going to lock up the pearly gates. We'll leave the key underneath the doormat for you. I mean, come on. All right. We're good with that, right? Right? All right. Lucifer fell. A third of the angels went with him. They have no access to heaven. Now watch. Just because Satan fell All right? And he has no access to heaven. It doesn't mean that he still can't throw accusations about us towards God and before God. Look at 10. Then I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, now the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Messiah have come. For the accuser of our brethren has been thrown down. He who accuses them before our God day and night. One of those phrases, and I've read their commentary, says, see, well, look, before our God. I'm standing before God right now. Everything I say, God hears my words. He hears my words, and he knows the intent of my heart. I'm standing before God as I speak. So when we sin, when we transgress, right, guess what? Okay, not only does God see that, but the fallen angels and Lucifer also see that. And guess what they do? Look at what your people are doing. And we're giving them ammunition to start hurling insults at God about us. And it happens. It happens. I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, who is that? I don't know. Whoever it is, they use the term our brethren. Okay? So anyway, at any rate, the passage is telling us Yeshua's virgin birth, sinless life, sacrificial death, bodily resurrection, and glorious ascension have taken a foe, a very dangerous foe, a very evil foe, and defeated that foe. We have a defeated foe. Don't take him lightly, but he's defeated. Verse 11, and they overcame him, because of the blood of the Lamb and because of the word of their testimony, and they did not love their life, even when faced with death. We have salvation because the blood of the Lamb has been applied to the doorposts of our hearts. What does it mean to overcome because of the word of their testimony? Oh, this touched me. To overcome because of the word of our testimony. Listen, each and every one of us here, we have a story. We have a story. Some parts of our stories, if we told them all, some are very similar and some are very different. But we each have a story. And our stories, if we told them, tell of a time when we went through some trials in our lives. We've gone through some storms in our lives. We've been in the prison. We've been in a cell. We've been hurting. Maybe it's a financial difficulty. Maybe it was a problem with a wayward child. Maybe it was a spouse that betrayed us. Maybe it was some kind of problem in our family. Whatever it was, but we were there. We were in the storm. We were in the prison cell. And God was there in the fire with us. He was there with us. And we suffered and we were hurt, but our God was there with us. And he never forsook us. And he cannot. And he got us through that storm. And he got us through that trial. And he got us out of that prison. Right? And he's still with us. And we've got that story. You've got that story. I've got stories like that. Where it's like nobody can take that story away from us. Nobody can take that story from you. What God has done with you when you were in the midst of the storm. Nobody can take that story, no matter what. I know because of my story, I know God lives. I know he lives, and he lives in me. And he's doing a work in me, and he's doing a work through me. And you can tell the same story. That's how we overcome by the word of our testimony. Our testimony is our story. He's alive, and he's working in us. Look at verse 12. For this reason, see? Rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them. Woe to the earth and the sea, because the devil has come down to you, having great wrath, knowing that he has only a short time. John, can you tell them we're having a service in here. They need to pipe down. Separation once again. God is in heaven, right? Satan the deceiver, this is his abode. This is his abode. All right, separate. Believers, as believers, we are raised up with Yeshua. We are seated with Yeshua Think about that. Ephesians 2:6. When God looks at you, he doesn't see you as an earth dweller. He sees you as a kingdom dweller, a heavenly dweller. All right? We are seated with him. The earth dwellers, Satan, Lucifer, the demons, this is their abode. This is their abode. And we all know what their future abode is going to be. But watch. Satan only has a short time. I hope you never have to come across, if you ever, don't ever do this, a cornered raccoon or a possum. Okay? I've come across, unfortunately, a possum, right? And it was when I was working with the cable company, and we lifted one of those big, those green lids off. I was with another guy, and all of a sudden, my buddy, we got our meters going, and we hear this, right? And we're looking at each other, and we look down in the hole, and man, there's a possum sitting there. And we're just like, pick it back up and lower it back down. It's okay. And we just, all right? Because if you come across a possum, a cornered one, or a wounded raccoon, or a rat, or a snake, right? What are they going to do? Man, it's survival mode. They're going to strike. They're going to bite you. As the days go by, Satan knows he only has a short time. And as every day goes by, he knows his days are becoming limited. And when his days become limited, he becomes more dangerous. He becomes more dangerous. He only has a short time. Verse 13, and when the dragon saw that he was thrown down to the earth, he persecuted the woman who gave birth to the male child. Past tense. But the two wings of the great eagle were given to the woman so that she could fly into the wilderness to her place, where she was nourished for a time and times and half a time from the presence of the serpent. Why has Lucifer attacked the Hebrew people for so many years? Because Israel holds the key. Israel has held the key to the Messiah, and Israel has held the key to the covenants. And if Satan and his cohorts can destroy Israel, he makes God a liar. That's it. The end of the covenants. God would be a liar. The two wings of the great eagle. Woo, where have we seen that terminology? Exodus 19:4. You yourselves have seen what I did to the Egyptians and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. I love that. There isn't a bird on planet Earth, that can fly as high as an eagle. The eagle can fly higher than any bird that God has ever made. When he takes care of you and me, he puts us up on eagle's wings. Eagle's wings, which means, listen, there isn't a storm, there isn't a trial, there isn't a trouble, there's no circumstance or situation that we can't fly over. That's what that means. He has got us, and he is going to take care of us. He cannot lie. I will never forsake you. So that she could fly into the wilderness. The wilderness, that's where God deals with his people. He's going to prepare Israel. Prepare Israel for what? For the coming of the king. Coming of the king. During the last half of the tribulation, God will protect Israel from Satan. That remnant, he's going to save them. How long is he going to watch over her? How long is he going to protect her? For a time and times and half a time. Time, 1 year. Times, 2 more years. Half a time, 3.5 years. The last half of the tribulation. Israel, we talked earlier, right, about terminology, right? If I just give you the word Israel, can you give me a definition? No, because I didn't give it to you in context. So Israel could mean the land, like I'm flying to Israel. Israel could mean the person. And Israel bowed down before God, right? Jacob. Israel could be the people, the Hebrew people, the house of Israel, when you see that term. What did we talk about earlier? The children of Israel. Now what does it mean? Believers. Regardless of ethnicity, regardless of gender. If you're sitting here saved, you're a child of Israel. Okay? Context determines the definition. Verse 15, and the serpent poured water like a river out of his mouth after the woman, so that he might cause her to be swept away with the flood. But the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened its mouth and drank up the river, which the dragon poured out of his mouth. So we see during the latter half of the tribulation, Satan and this false Messiah, this Antichrist, if you will, are going to promote an ever-increasing amount of anti-Semitism against Israel all over the earth. But look at what he writes. Earth helped. Earth opened its mouth. What does that mean? It doesn't mean literally. Could be, because we've seen it before. All right. When has God used the earth to judge the ungodly? Red Sea. Yeah. Took care of Pharaoh and his army really quick. When did God use the earth? Korah and the rebellion. Took care of that rebellion really quick. So he's used the earth before. Is he going to do it again? Whatever it looks like, he will protect Israel during this period of time. 17. So the dragon was enraged with the woman and went off to make war. So Satan won't be able to touch Israel. He's going to protect his remnant because he's going to save her. So if Satan can't get to the natural branches, guess where he will turn his attention to? Verse 17, once again, the rest of her children, who keep the commandments of God and hold to the testimony of Yeshua. So we see very clearly, the woman is Israel here, and Israel is going to be protected during this tribulation period. For what? The coming of the king. All Israel will be saved, Romans 11. And if Satan can't touch Israel during that time, and the Antichrist can't touch Israel, they're going to turn their attention to the wild branches, the grafted in branches. Say, the rest of her children. And so this unholy trinity, and we'll be introduced to them next week when we get back together, is going to persecute believers all across this entire world. We can't get to Israel? Fine, we'll turn our attention to everybody else. And when we get to Revelation 13, you'll see exactly how they're going to do it. Let's pray. Abba, we thank you again. We thank you for, we thank you for delivering us. We thank you, Lord, for the wilderness. We thank you that you would care so much about us, that you want to use us. And sometimes you bring us out there, but you're always faithful and true. We thank you for that. We thank you, Lord, for the eagle's wings you put us up on. So many times in this world, Lord, so many times through our life, things come at us, hardship and pain and death and money issues and trials and family squabbles and on and on and on. And yet, Lord, your scriptures are faithful and true. We can soar over any of those things. You've promised us that. Lord, we thank you for the stories that we have. We thank you that we can overcome by the word of our testimony. We know each one of us has a story to tell. And we know that you're alive, that you live in us and through us. And we thank you for our stories. We can relate our story to other people to show that God is real, God is alive, and you're wonderful and you're true and you're coming again. Bless these that are here. Of course, bless those that could not be here, so many traveling, so many at work, and so on and so forth. But give them safety as they travel back home, and bless us in spite of us. In Yeshua's name we pray all these things as always. Amen.